Hello friends, welcome back to the potting shed. It is such a beautiful quiet afternoon here. The late afternoon sun is just beginning to slant through the dusty glass of the windows, casting long golden shadows across my workbench. I have a fresh cup of chamomile tea steeping right here, and the air smells wonderfully of damp earth, rich compost, and just a hint of crushed eucalyptus. Take a deep breath with me. Settle in. Whether you are listening to this while you repot your own green companions, or you are just curling up with a blanket on the sofa, I am so deeply glad you are here with me today. Today, we are going to talk about something very vulnerable. We need to talk about that one corner of your room. You know the one I mean. Tucked away on a shadowy shelf, or hiding behind a curtain, sits a tragic botanical casualty. Its leaves might be crispy and brown, curling inward like defensive little claws. Or perhaps they are a sickly, translucent yellow, drooping with the heavy, sad weight of too much water. It is a dying houseplant, and for so many of us, looking at it triggers a surprisingly heavy sense of guilt. We bring these living things into our homes with the best of intentions, promising to nurture them. When they begin to fail, we feel like we have failed. We look at the vibrant, lush indoor jungles paraded across social media, the perfect monstera leaves and trailing pothos, and we look back at our own little fiddle leaf fig that now resembles a barren, sad twig. The temptation is so incredibly strong to simply toss that wilted mess into the compost bin, throw out the nursery pot, and try to forget the botanical tragedy ever happened. We just want to erase the evidence of our mistake. But wait, my dear friend, please, don't throw it away just yet. Leave it right where it is for a moment, and let me offer you a different perspective. A perspective of hope. Welcome to the redemption arc. In all my years in the dirt, I can promise you that almost nothing in the gardening world is as deeply satisfying, as emotionally rewarding, or as educational as bringing a plant back from the brink of death. It is a story of profound resilience and second chances. You see, plants are remarkable evolutionary survivors. They have adapted over millions of years to withstand droughts, floods, and severe physical damage. With the right intervention, that seemingly doomed plant in your corner can absolutely thrive again. By the end of our time together today, you will know exactly how to guide it back to life. When a dying plant is brought to my workbench, I don't see a lost cause. I see a patient in need of triage. I see a puzzle just waiting to be solved. And the very first rule of triage is to remain calm. Do not reach for the watering can, and please, put down the fertilizer bottle. The biggest mistake we make as anxious plant parents is the panic water, or the panic feed. Fertilizing a dying plant is like trying to force a 5-course meal down the throat of someone battling the stomach flu. It only shocks their system further. Instead, we are going to become botanical detectives. We are going to perform a systematic assessment to find the root cause of the plant's decline. We must diagnose before we act. Before we dedicate weeks to a rehabilitation project, we have to gently determine if the plant has truly passed on, or if it is merely dormant, shocked, or severely stressed. Many plants, especially woody perennials and houseplants like the rubber tree, can drop every single leaf and still be very much alive inside. To find out, I perform the scratch test. I take my thumb, or a clean, sterilized grafting knife, and I very gently scrape away a tiny, millimeter-sized section of the outer bark on the main stem. We are looking for the cambium layer. If the tissue underneath is green, moist, and fleshy, take a deep breath of relief. The vascular system is still functioning. There is hope. Now, if you do that scratch test and the tissue underneath is brown, dry, and brittle, that specific branch is sadly gone. If it feels mushy and black, the plant is suffering from cellular collapse, usually from deep rot. But don't give up after one scratch. Start near the top of the plant and work your way slowly down toward the soil line, testing every few inches. Even if the top half of your plant snaps off like a dry winter twig, finding a tiny patch of vibrant green stem near the base means the root system might still be fiercely supporting life underground. It is holding on, waiting for you. Once we know there is life in the stem, we look to the foliage. Leaves are the beautiful solar panels of the plant, yes, but they are also its primary communication system. They tell the story of what the plant has endured. If you see crispy brown edges that crumble into dust when you gently touch them, this is classic necrosis. The plant's cells have dried out and died, usually from profound dehydration, bone-dry ambient air, or even saltburn from hard tap water. But what if the leaves are turning a soft, sickly yellow, starting from the bottom of the stem and working their way up? This is chlorosis, and it is the classic hallmark of overwatering. When roots are drowning in waterlogged soil, they actually suffocate. They cannot absorb nitrogen or other nutrients. So, in an act of desperate survival, the plant cannibalizes its older, lower leaves, draining them of nutrients to send energy to the new growth at the top. It sacrifices its past to save its future. You might also notice severe drooping or wilting. Plant cells are like microscopic water balloons. When they are full, the plant stands tall and proud. We call this turgor pressure. If the soil is dry and the plant droops, it has simply deflated from thirst. But if the soil is soaking wet and the plant is still drooping, you have a paradox. The roots have rotted away, and the plant has no mechanism to drink. It is dying of thirst in a flooded room. Once we have read the superficial symptoms, it is time to look under the hood. If there is a primary villain in the story of dying houseplants, it is undoubtedly root rot. But I want to share a little horticultural secret with you. Root rot is not actually caused by water itself. It is caused by a lack of oxygen. When a plant sits in dense, heavy potting soil that never dries out, all the tiny microscopic air pockets in the soil fill with water, pushing out the vital oxygen. Plant roots actually need to breathe. They respire to produce the energy required to pull water up into their stems. In an oxygen-starved environment, those roots simply suffocate. To save a drowning plant, we must prepare for excavation. I like to lay down an old newspaper on my workbench to keep things tidy. I pick up the nursery pot, and if the soil is tightly packed, I gently squeeze the sides, massaging it to loosen the earth. I never, ever yank the plant by its fragile stem. As the root ball slides out into my hands, the diagnosis is usually immediate. Healthy roots are firm, plump, and crisp. Depending on the plant, they might be bright white, tan, or pale yellow, and they smell like rich, earthy forest soil after a spring rain. It is a grounding, wonderful scent. But rotting roots? They are dark brown or jet black. They feel slimy, and they smell distinctively foul, almost like a stagnant swamp. This moment Right here is where the redemption arc truly begins. You must become a botanical surgeon. First, I take the plant over to the sink and use lukewarm water to gently wash away as much of the old, soggy, pathogen-filled soil as possible. This exposes the true extent of the damage underneath. Next, I take my sharpest pruning snips and I wipe the blades down with a cotton pad soaked in 70% isopropyl alcohol. Sterilization is incredibly important here to prevent spreading fungal spores. Then, with a steady hand, I ruthlessly cut away every single piece of black, mushy, or hollow root. I cut about an inch above the rot, straight into the firm, healthy white tissue to make absolutely sure I have a clean margin. Leaving even a tiny section of rot can allow the pathogens, like Pythium or Phytophthora, to spread back into the healthy tissue. Once the bad roots are completely removed, I perform my favorite magic trick, the hydrogen peroxide bath. I mix a solution of 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 3 parts water. I gently dip the remaining healthy root system into this bowl. Almost instantly, you will see a gentle fizzing and bubbling. That bubbling action is the peroxide oxidizing the fungal spores, but more importantly, it is releasing free oxygen molecules directly to the starving roots. It is quite literally giving your plant an immediate, revitalizing breath of fresh air. But what if your plant isn't drowning? What if you unpot it and the soil is a dusty, rock-hard brick? While overwatering drowns roots, underwatering desiccates them. When a plant is chronically ignored, its microscopic root hairs, the delicate, invisible structures responsible for the vast majority of water absorption, shrivel up and die. Furthermore, peat-heavy potting soils do something very tricky when they dry out completely. They become hydrophobic. They actually repel water. Have you ever poured water onto a bone-dry plant, only to watch the water instantly run down the inside edges of the pot and straight out the bottom? The water is entirely bypassing the root zone. You think you've watered it, but the plant remains completely parched. When I encounter a crispy, dehydrated patient stuck in hydrophobic soil, I don't water it from the top. I use hydration therapy through bottom watering and capillary action. I fill a basin or a sink with room temperature water. Cold water can deeply shock the sensitive tropical roots of most houseplants. Then I submerge the plant's pot into the basin, right up to the rim, making sure the water doesn't spill over the top into the soil. Through the drainage holes at the bottom, the dry soil slowly begins to wick the water upward, fighting gravity through capillary action. This slow, steady absorption forces the compacted peat moss to expand and rehydrate uniformly. It ensures there are no dry pockets left hiding in the center of the root ball. I leave the plant sitting peacefully in the basin for about 30 to 60 minutes. I know it's ready when I can rest my fingers on the top layer of the soil and it feels wonderfully moist and cool to the touch. But here is the crucial next step. Once it is fully hydrated, I lift the pot out of the basin and set it on a draining rack. I let it drain completely for another hour. Standing water must never remain in the catch tray, otherwise we are just trading our underwatering problem for an overwatering one. Once we have addressed the immediate crisis of the roots, whether through surgical removal of rot or deep, patient hydration, our plant needs a safe place to recover. The soil is the plant's sanctuary. Putting a newly root-pruned plant back into dense, heavy, moisture-retaining potting soil is a surefire way to lose it. The plant now has a vastly reduced root system. It is going to drink much less water than it used to. If placed in a massive pot full of dense earth, that soil will stay wet for weeks, inviting the rot right back in. We need to create an environment that breathes. We need to mix up something tactile, chunky and light. Let's make my favourite rescue mix. For a standard tropical rescue, like a sad monstera, a philodendron, or a pothos, I never use straight potting soil out of the bag. Instead, I mix my own. In a large bucket, I combine 30% high-quality organic potting soil to provide a baseline of gentle nutrients and moisture retention. Then, I add 30% orchid bark. These are large, beautiful chunks of pine bark that smell like a pine forest. They create massive air pockets in the soil structure, ensuring roots can breathe immediately after watering. I mix in 30% coarse perlite or pumice, which is porous volcanic rock that provides incredible drainage and stops the soil from compacting over time. Finally, I add 10% horticultural charcoal, which acts as a biofilter, sweetening the soil and guarding against bacterial buildup. When choosing a new home for our recovering plant, pot size is everything. I follow the snug rule. When a plant has lost a significant portion of its roots, I never put it back into its original large pot. A pot that is too large holds too much wet soil relative to the tiny root mass. Instead, I downpot. I select a clean pot, always with drainage holes, that is only 1 to 2 inches wider than the newly reduced root ball. The plant should feel slightly snug in its new home. This ensures the roots can drink up the moisture in the soil relatively quickly, allowing the soil to undergo that essential wet-to-dry cycle. It is that drying phase that actually stimulates the plant to push out brand new root growth in search of water. Now comes what is perhaps the most emotionally difficult part of the redemption arc for any plant parent: the pruning. I know how hard this is. When your plant has only a few sad, yellowing or half-brown leaves left clinging to the stem, your natural instinct is to hold onto them tightly. You think, surely the plant needs all the leaves it can get to survive. Surely every bit of green helps. It feels cruel to cut away the foliage when there is so little left. But horticultural science dictates the exact opposite. Sometimes, to be kind, we have to be a little bit ruthless. We have to look at the overall architecture of the plant and make a difficult choice for its long-term survival. A plant exists in a very delicate hydraulic balance between its root system below ground, which absorbs water, and its leafy canopy above ground, which uses that water for photosynthesis. If we have just amputated 50% of a plant's rotting roots, the remaining 50% simply cannot support the original amount of foliage up top. If we leave all the leaves, the plant will suffer profound hydraulic failure. Trying desperately to pump water up to leaves it can no longer afford to maintain. It will exhaust itself to death. By strategically cutting back the foliage, we reduce the plant's demand for water. We take an immense, heavy burden off the healing root system, allowing it to rest and recover. Leaves that are significantly yellowed, deeply browned, or completely limp and wilted are no longer contributing to the plant's energy grid. In fact, they have become parasitic. The plant is wasting its precious, limited metabolic energy trying to repair dying tissues or fighting off the secondary fungal infections that love to attack necrotic plant matter. With my sterilized shears, I carefully remove all totally yellow or brown leaves. I snip away any stems that feel mushy or hollow. If the root loss was incredibly severe, I might even take off up to 1/3 of the remaining healthy growth. It feels drastic, I know. It leaves the plant looking a little bare, but it is an act of deep care. This strategic pruning serves another miraculous function. It triggers explosive new growth. Plants naturally produce a hormone called auxin, which is heavily concentrated in the apical bud, the very highest growing point at the tip of a stem. Auxin's job is to suppress the growth of the lower lateral buds. This is an evolutionary trait called apical dominance, which forces the plant to grow straight and tall to compete for sunlight in a crowded forest. When we snip off the top of a leggy, dying plant, we physically remove that auxin factory. Without the suppressing hormone travelling down the stem, the dormant nodes further down suddenly wake up. Within weeks, multiple new growth points will emerge. What feels like destruction is actually the biochemical key to rebirth. With the roots cleaned, the soil optimized, the pot downsized, and the heavy burden of the foliage pruned away, our patient is stabilized. But it is still very weak. It has just undergone major surgery. If we place it right back onto a drafty, cold windowsill, or into the harsh, baking afternoon sun, the shock will likely be fatal. We need to construct a plant ICU. This is a gentle, highly controlled environment where the plant can rest. I like to find a quiet spot in my home that feels incredibly stable. No sudden temperature drops, no blasts of dry heat from a radiator. We are going to strictly manipulate 3 things during this recovery phase: light, humidity, and nutrients. A recovering plant desperately needs to photosynthesize. That is how it generates the sugars and energy required to grow new roots. But it absolutely cannot handle the stress of direct sunlight. Direct UV rays generate heat on the surface of the leaf, causing the plant to transpire or sweat water rapidly. A plant with a compromised root system cannot replace this sweated water fast enough, and it will quickly dry out and perish. I place my patients in the Goldilocks zone of bright, indirect light. Practically, this means placing the plant near an east-facing window where it sees the open sky, but not the direct, burning beams of the sun. If you have a south or west window, simply pull the plant a few feet back, or soften the light with a gentle, sheer white curtain. For our tropical plants, ambient humidity is the magic elixir of recovery. Because the root system is weak, the plant struggles to pull moisture up from the soil. But by increasing the humidity in the air around the leaves, we decrease something called the vapor pressure deficit. Essentially, when the air is already highly saturated with moisture, the leaves don't sweat as much, preserving the plant's internal hydration. For small, severely compromised rescues, I create a humidity dome. I will place a large, clear plastic Ziploc bag, a beautiful glass cloche, or even an inverted clear plastic storage bin over the plant. This traps the moisture, creating a little microclimate of 80 to 90% humidity. It is like a healing spa for the foliage. There is a crucial caveat to the humidity dome, however. Stagnant, excessively humid air is a breeding ground for powdery mildew and fungal disease. Every single day, I make sure to lift the dome for about 15 minutes to allow for fresh air exchange, gently wafting the air around the leaves with my hand to keep things fresh. And while the plant is resting in this ICU phase, I maintain a strict no fertilizer rule. Synthetic fertilizers are essentially composed of complex mineral salts. If you apply them to a stressed, root-damaged plant, those salts will actually draw water out of the remaining roots via reverse osmosis, causing catastrophic fertilizer burn. The plant must rely entirely on its own internal energy reserves until it pushes out robust, new top growth. Now we arrive at the most challenging phase of the entire redemption arc. It isn't the unpotting, the pruning, or the messy soil mixing. The hardest part is simply waiting. When I place a rehabilitated plant into the ICU, I establish a strict personal rule. Do not hover. A deeply stressed plant operates on a much slower metabolic timeline than a healthy one. It is dedicating all of its microscopic energy to healing hidden wounds under the soil, pushing out invisible new root hairs and stabilizing its internal hydraulics. Above the soil line, to our human eyes, it may look like absolutely nothing is happening for weeks, sometimes even months. It is perfectly still. And this is exactly the moment where many well-meaning plant parents sabotage the revival. We see a lack of immediate growth as a failure on our part. We panic. We assume the plant must need more water, so we water the already moist soil, drowning the fragile microscopic new root hairs that were just beginning to form. We assume it must be starving, so we break the rule and dump chemical fertilizer into the pot, burning those delicate new tissues. Or we constantly pull the plant out of its pot to check on the roots, causing repeated, devastating mechanical trauma. My friends, I preach the horticulture of benign neglect. Once the triage is done and the corrective actions are taken, the plant must be allowed to rest. Monitor the soil moisture gently with your finger, only watering when the top 2 inches are genuinely dry. But otherwise, you just wait. And then, one quiet morning, the climax of the redemption arc arrives. It usually starts almost imperceptibly. You are sipping your coffee, looking at the bare stems, when you notice it. A tiny, tightly wound green spike has emerged from the base of a stem. Or perhaps a small, pale green nub has swelled on the side of a pruned woody branch. Over the next few days, this speck of life grows, elongating and drawing energy from the revitalized root system below. Finally, it unfurls. The new leaf is absolutely perfect. It is glossy, vibrant, and completely unmarred by the trauma of the plant's past. It catches the morning light beautifully. It is the physical manifestation of resilience. That single new leaf represents a total victory over decay. This is why the emotional stakes of plant rehabilitation are so wonderfully high. Taking a before and after photo, comparing the withered, root-rotted stump from months ago to the lush, thriving, vibrant plant it has become today, is deeply empowering. It proves that with patience, observation, and a fundamental understanding of nature's processes, we can reverse the damage. The heavy guilt of the dying plant is completely washed away, replaced by the profound joy of a successful rescue. It is a testament to the fact that almost nothing in the botanical world is truly a lost cause until it is completely desiccated and brown. Gardening, whether across acres of farmland or in a few terracotta pots on a windowsill, is inherently an act of profound optimism. When we look at a struggling plant, it is so easy to view it as a personal failure or a chore to be discarded. But I hope today you can reframe it as an opportunity. It is an invitation to learn about botany, soil science, and environmental adaptation. So, the next time you walk past that sad, crispy, or drowning plant in the corner of your room, don't throw it away. Pick it up, scratch the stem, check the roots, mix up some chunky soil, grab your sterilized shears, and give that plant its second chance. I would love to hear what rescues you are working on, or what is growing beautifully in your garden right now, so please leave a comment below. If you enjoyed our time in the potting shed, I invite you to subscribe for more cozy garden chats. Until next time, happy growing.